But I do love it. I think there's a little bit of sense of freedom throughout my day, how I can really focus where I want. So we do have two amazing women with us today. We have Caitlin and we have Danielle. And I want them to go ahead and quickly introduce themselves, and then I want to quickly go around the table and have everyone introduce themselves as well. So we'll start off with Caitlin in alphabetical order. So if you can go ahead and tell us a little bit about you so we can all get a good sense of who you are today.
Sure, of course. Nice to meet everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Caitlin. I have been at Katerra for the last year and a half, currently working in our construction operations team. I think folks are probably familiar with the kind of the business model, but it is a fully vertically integrated company. So you can think, you know, we've got design, manufacturing, sourcing, business development, and obviously construction. So the best way to think about kind of things I work on is really supporting the job site team as my customers. So helping to stand up processes and systems that allow us to work with those upstream partners, as well as kind of even within our control at the construction job site. So advanced work packaging, schedule utilization, labor productivity. These are kind of some of the initiatives that my team works on. Prior to Katerra, I come from more of the e-commerce space. Most recently was at Amazon. And one of the things that I really like about Katerra, at least the team that I'm on, is it's a very eclectic group of people. So we have a ton of construction veterans, right, who grew up in the industry and are great SMEs to go through, but also kind of some random hodgepodge. So me, not having construction experience, right, I've got an MBA, but have not spent a lot of time out at the job site. So it's about bringing together people from kind of all different backgrounds. We have some Navy SEALs, we've got a ton of industrial engineers, and it's just trying to work together to kind of put some new approaches in place out at the job site to make their jobs, the days of the job site team easier and more consistent in delivery.
Awesome. Danielle.
Nice. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Danielle, co-founder and CEO of VIATechnik. I know some of you, so it's nice to see some friendly faces again. So I founded VIATechnik about 8 years ago. We play exclusively in this like virtual design and construction, digitization of the design, construction, operations process of buildings and infrastructure. So heavily focused on technology and innovation in both the construction and real estate industries. It's kind of funny to be in this roundtable as like a subject matter expert for remote work, because from my point of view, COVID sort of forced us all to be subject matter experts. So I'm really looking forward to making this a collaborative conversation, because, you know, we've been doing it now for at least 5 months, and that's long enough in my book, I think, to give us all some really interesting insights to share together. So I'm excited for this.
Awesome. Thank you both. And I just want to quickly introduce the folks that we have here in the roundtable. Todd is the Director of Creative Marketing over at Applied Software. A couple months ago, he was one of our subject matter experts regarding creating content and how to keep the engagement with the audience. And so one of the things that, you know, we learned from him was he found a lot of engagement in LinkedIn. And one of my biggest takeaways from his conversation is, I'm blanking out on his name. Travis, sorry. I think I confused both of you. As far as how do you measure data? So he had some really good insights to share. Russ, I believe this is your first time in this particular roundtable that you're joining us. And I really like when you registered, you kind of talked about, you know, how do we capture on-site progress accurately, as that being the foundation that's actionable with construction analytics. And we'll love to kind of have you kind of talk more a little bit as we move along the conversation to see how we can together talk about this. And I know we have Brok from dRofus, and so I'm excited to hear about his experience and things that he's going to share with his own insights and working from home. Adrian, this is the first time you're joining us, and you are CEO and founder of, I'm going to say the name wrong, but please correct me, IMAJION?
That works for us. You know, okay. You can say it as IMAJION if you want, but, you know, IMAJION's just fine. So.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm excited to hear more about, your collaboration platform that you design. Please feel free to kind of interject and so we can capture your thoughts. And then we have Trent from I'm not really good. Thank you.
Yep.
So thank you here being with us. And then we also have Dia. Welcome, Dia. I didn't see your name on the registration list, but can you tell us?
I swear I registered. I'm not gate crashing the party. I promise.
No, it's fine. It wasn't. But thank you for being here.
Anyway.
No, you're allowed to crash. But yeah, so yeah, again, feel free to jump in this conversation. We definitely want this to be as relaxing as possible. But I want to go ahead and have things, kick things off with Caitlin. So Caitlin was actually the inspiration for this specific topic for team engagement with remote collaboration, because she was here last month, looking for, specific insights and best practice on how she can be, engaged with her team. And I kind of want her to kind of talk about sort of, her challenges and how she sees sort of that direct correlation with Agile and Scrum. And maybe kind of start off with telling us what is Agile and Scrum. I think some of us know who are on the technical engineering side of software, and I'm starting to see more of that of the Agile and Scrum practices sort of seep into construction workflow. So Caitlin, can you go ahead and get us started on what is it and sort of that, inspiration point that brought you here last month?
Yeah, so this whole thing is because I misinterpreted what last month was. So my mistake. Came in ready to talk about how to engage with my team remotely. And was like, this is about podcasting, which is super cool to learn, but next time. So thank you, Lilian and Nathan, for inviting this topic. Before I jump in, quick kind of poll, raise your hand, how many of you guys are familiar with Agile? So I can kind of tailor this. So somewhat. Okay, so for some of you, this may be too much. I'll try to keep it relatively high level. I'll also say for those that are looking to learn more, I would recommend looking out and reading the Agile Manifesto. But high level, Agile really came about in the early 2000s in software development industry. And it's really kind of an approach or methodology just to executing work. If you go and read the manifesto, it's going to get very technical, but it has 3 pillars, 4 core values, and 12 principles. What I think is the most transferable for any industry is focusing on those pillars, those being transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So what Agile does is it allows for work to be executed in a way that is kind of iterative and incremental. You'll probably hear things like Scrum and sprints and user stories and backlog, and all of those are terms that are used in the Agile Manifesto, or sorry, in the Agile methodology. So for our team, I think I told you guys we have kind of an eclectic background of folks. I'll say one of our biggest strengths is thinking, and we've got a lot of great thinkers. But something that we kind of have an opportunity to grow in is the actualization of ideas. We'll pick apart a problem, come up with 10 different solutions, and think about all of the angles and pros and cons. But there was definitely a gap of executing work, testing it out, and iterating and improving as you go. So that's kind of why my team adopted Agile about 9 months ago. A few of us from the different industries prior to construction came in and pitched it to our director, who sent us off for some training. I'll talk about Scrum in general in the software development industry. We interpreted it and kind of made what we're calling Scrum Butt for how does Katerra use it. But in the software development world, what it typically looks like is you have, you're executing in sprints. So those are typically 1 to 2 weeks worth of work. You'll have designated roles and designated ceremonies. So you'll hear things like the developer team, your product owner, and your Scrum Master. Kind of what that looks like is your product owner is the person who's setting the vision and basically says, what is the scope of work that needs to be made, at a grandiose level? What is this product going to do? And they are meant to keep in mind customer needs and balance that with the value of the developer time and really money, right? So it's trying to make sure that you prioritize what your developer team is doing. in the software world, right? It really is like your QA and your front-end developers, back-end developers. But in this case, we're doing it more for those construction operations processes. You have a Scrum Master, which is what I am, which is very much kind of a facilitator of the Agile process and a coach. So bringing all the people in the room, making sure that there's kind of upfront shared understanding of what is the problem, what's the scope, and like what does done look like. After this team has spent 2 weeks working on this, what will, if Rez is my product owner, like what will satisfy you, Rez? At the end of every sprint, there's typically a sprint review where it's a demo in the software world, or again, this can be applied in any industry, but where you're actually exhibiting the work that was produced, like that tangible deliverable. It's an opportunity for your product owner and other stakeholders to come in and provide feedback, whether it's, hey, that's great, let's go test it more, or, that didn't exactly meet what I need. I wanted it to actually, do X, Y, and Z, or, be this color in the software world. And so then that's kind of feedback that's taken and put back into the product backlog and reprioritized. So it could go into the next sprint, could be decided, great feedback, but we're going to look at that again in 2 months. What's really important to me about Agile is that it is so adaptable to like changing needs. So it could be internally, maybe there's customer feedback that makes you change, or business objectives, but even externally, like with the world of COVID, like maybe everything that you'd originally planned just blew up. So rather than being locked into, a 1-year contract or 1-year plan for development, it allows you to adjust really, really quickly. And so let's see, I feel like I hit on most of the key things here.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, I think you
Nathan's
did.
shaking his head. He's like, yeah, that's all of it. I'm
Yeah.
done. That's Scrum in 5 minutes or less.
I asked a question in the chat because I wanted to not talk, but I'm going to talk anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Well, actually, before I ask my question that I chatted, I want to know from a Katerra standpoint, because I was trying to figure out where to categorize Katerra. And would you consider Katerra to be a technology company or a AEC company?
All of the above.
I know. Well, no, you have to pick one. You have to pick one.
I think our business model focuses so much on being able to execute across all the different parties. So I think I would say technology, because that's what's enabling us to be able to, share information, not just tangible inputs, but so much as information sharing as you kind of look through like managing the white space between the processes. So the tech is what enables it.
Interesting. And because the question that I asked that may apply to your answer right there, or others may have thoughts on like the terms of Agile that I've become familiar with, of product owner, development team, Scrum Master, those different terms. Like, can we just kind of copy and paste those same terms in AEC, or is it too confusing with the whole word owner and,
right,
what we deem as owner, which again, that's our own mess. But I'm curious if you've run into that at all, of like the words that you've learned versus the word the industry responds to, and if there's alignment or non-alignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And kind of like I said, where we're using what we're calling Scrum Butt, where we're taking these principles and changing it around slightly. So perfect example, like the product owner role for our design team, we've got them executing in sprints as well outside of the construction ops team. And what we have instead of a product owner is a key stakeholder, is what we're just using that as the framework, so that it doesn't get confusing when you say owner, right? So you say that key stakeholder is the one who's got, JIRA boards, and you've got multiple projects that are happening at the same time, so that we can all see the resource management across, which is really important too. Something that I think is unique typically in the software development where it came from is you have a dedicated team. Like, this is your group of developers, this is the Scrum Master. Usually Scrum Masters can kind of manage multiple teams at once, but the developers stay together and move together. Part of the process of Agile is continuous improvement, not just with the work output, but also in these retrospectives that happen at the end of every sprint. You're sharing feedback on the process. Again, I'm going to use Rez because he and I know each other, but if he and I were on a team and maybe it's it really upset me, in the daily stand-up, like, I'm going to tell you, yesterday, you didn't respond to my Teams message and it took 3 hours. Can we work on our communication flow so that I know that I should be calling you with this or emailing you with this? And so the idea is that you're moving forward together as a unit, getting better. Something that we're doing that's really different is that we're doing sprints, but we're rotating the members of the team, because we don't have what you're calling a typical developer. I'm not on software. We're using software out in the field, but I'm not actually like developing the software, right? And so I need to make sure that my Scrum team has the 4 to 5 people that can solve the problem that we're working on for that next 2-week sprint, and are interested in it. One of the aspects of Agile is that it's kind of self-organizing, that you have people on the team that can pick apart a problem and actively want to contribute to it and have, like mutual ownership of the solution. But that's something that when we first started Scrum back in, I think it was October, November of last year, was a little bit difficult because we had changing people in each team. At this point, now that we've been through so many sprints, I mean, it's the same group of about 30 people that are participating, and kind of tapping on the engagement aspect. We were able to build up this intangible engagement levels between each other, so that now I could pick, Danielle and Brok. Maybe you guys weren't on a sprint team together in the past, but because you work together and, prior to sprint world, you know each other and you're growing, and you've both been in sprints separately. So you're able to come together and know expectations.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin, I think you touched on something that is definitely resonating with a lot of people here. We'd love to have Danielle jump in and ask this question. She typed in a question about if you can describe, because the Agile process does require a lot of touch points. Can you describe, actually, you know what, Danielle, go ahead. I'll have you ask the question. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think that Agile is a really important process that actually the construction industry struggles with a little bit, right? Like manufacturing gets it, technology gets it. And in construction, we're building products too, in a way, right? But sometimes we struggle with it. And one, I think, interesting aspect of it is these different like touch points and handoffs, and you kind of like reached a checkpoint, and now, now there's another sprint, right? Mm-hmm. With all these different touch points and all these different handoffs, it's 100% virtual now. And something's lost, right? With that 15-minute stand up that like used to be in person. So how have you like replicated or changed some of that to like move to 100% virtual?
Yeah, no, definitely. Having to do everything via Zoom. One of the things that we require is that for any sprint that is ceremony that's happening as part of the sprint, we need to be on video so that we can at least be seeing each other. Obviously, like one of the things that we love, we actually have a dedicated space in the office that's, a room full of whiteboards that we can work in, and sticky notes and all these things. It's just great for collaboration. Virtually, we're not doing that, right? So heavily using like Office 365 so that, you got one person sharing screen and everyone can work together in those brainstorm sessions. But from a stand-up perspective, it's still all Zoom, and it's be punctual. That's part of Agile, right? Like it's time boxing your events. So it really is show up at 8. That's when the stand-up is. Like, I want to be off of here by 8:15. We're going to, go around the Jira board and like give us an update if that's done or not. Any blockers? Mm-hmm. Great. Move forward. So
can I ask you a tough question?
Please.
Does everybody turn on their cameras? Does everybody does everybody give their full attention for that 15-minute stand-up, or do they actually like have their email up too, or like the phone like just below the webcam?
Yeah. No, I'd say, at this point, it's probably like 80% of the way adopted. Early on, it was a little bit of a struggle, but like I mentioned, those teams change out. And so when it's like a new sprint, a new team, there's still some of that rough edge of like, okay, this is the team I'm going to work with. Let me collaborate. But usually by like mid-sprint, we're all up on cameras, feeling comfortable.
I think this is a great question for everyone here in the roundtable. I know, Caitlin, it's definitely a struggle. I've been in many meetings where, some folks don't turn on the camera. Danielle, you probably experienced this as well. What's the magic word or the magic phrase to get everyone to turn on their camera? And I think this is where culture comes in as well, like company culture. Any input from everyone here as, something. Can you share something that's worked, or are we all kind of struggling in the same boat here?
In my experience, just making it a mandate and expected etiquette is the best way to handle it. Because it's interesting that I've worked with a number of companies or clients that simply never turn on their camera. It's just sort of, they use it as almost just like a conference situation. But as far as our company goes, it is just etiquette. If you got a camera, use it.
I think that that drives towards something that I think has been a tough point maybe for firms that adapted these video meetings to replace, a traditional in-office setting, which is, Trent, I've seen exactly what you see. There are certain vendors who just basically treat this like it's a conference call. So they don't view this as a replacement for us all meeting together physically. They view this as the computer version of dialing my phone number and talking to me. So I think that establishing that, yes, it's a mandate, but it's because we're meeting together and it's our etiquette, is exactly the right approach, because it gets people in the mindset that this is a face-to-face meeting. It's not a phone call. And because it's a face-to-face meeting, we're engaged and we're making eye contact and we're having a little bit more fun than we would just sitting and staring at the phone screen. And I think it's setting that precedent early on. It makes the culture that much more, smooth with the remote process, and it winds up as a better result for everybody. It was kind of unusual for us. We never have had to mandate video. Everybody always keeps video on our calls, and we didn't even really realize it had happened until we hired somebody on who remarked, so I guess we're always all on video, huh? And I think for us, it's because we founded the company co-located and went distributed. And so it was like, of course I'm going to make eye contact with Kyle. I haven't seen him in person, so.
Yeah, I'm working at a rather traditional construction company, and I've noticed kind of depends on who I'm meeting with. So I'm meeting all the time with people, usually through Teams or Zoom or GoToMeeting, and it's usually the people that are either have the clue as to whether they're going to share a video is this. Is there a camera that faces them? Because a lot of people will just have their kind of laptop just closed and off to the side, and then they have those two external screens, and they didn't bother to buy webcams, and quite frankly, the last 6 months have been really difficult to even buy a webcam. So that's what I've noticed. It's not that necessarily that they don't want to share. I think in general, superintendents don't like to do it, but I think it's more that they just don't have a camera facing them.
Daniel, can I ask you a question? Because you meet with some of our team members. Are their cameras on?
Yeah. I see you walk by sometimes too.
Oh, actually, yeah, that is sort of, they were asking before. I share a desk with our co-founder / COO / my husband. And he'll have a meeting with people I know, but I'm not invited to the meeting. So I'm like on the side of the desk, but every once in a while I'll like go back to like get something from the drawer, and then you can see me and people will be like, "Hey Danielle," and I'll be like, "Oh, sorry." But I think what I'm hearing is interesting. And if I sort of like zoom out, the philosophy that I try to take at VIATechnik, it's sort of like three-pronged, right? Like you have to have that really strong culture that like helps drive engagement, that like means you actually do want to see the other people, and that like maybe if you're having a bad day, one, you're not going to be judged for wearing the baseball cap in your pajamas, or two, like it's okay to say like, hey, like I've had a rough start to my day, so like if it's cool, I'm going to keep my camera off. Or I'll say that sometimes, like, hey, I've been in meeting to meeting, and I don't want you to watch me eat this Chicago style hot dog. Is it cool if I keep it off for 15 minutes? So like one, I think, is the culture. Two is policy, but that sounds like a very harsh word, right? Like we have this internal intranet, we call it VIATechnik Nucleus. And there's like a little post, and it was saying like, we want to see your smile. And that was actually, we wrote that before COVID, but it's kind of like a policy statement about like how we do remote conference calls with each other. But policy, for lack of a better word. And then the last is technology and tools. And I think that gets like Daniel's points about like, hey, maybe we haven't like armed our people with the right tools to do this well. And I do urge our team and sometimes our clients to think about like, is Zoom and the webcam even the right tool, right? Because we used to have all these different types of meetings, and now we're like magically replicating them all on Zoom, and it's like, maybe Zoom is like a silver bullet, but like probably not. And we've definitely seen some situations where like different tools would really be great. Like some of the virtual reality meetings, it can be kind of like scary to get into, but for the right group of people, like it's perfect. And we just held our company's like virtual retreat, and our advisor at the end of the meeting, it was like, he's a big fan in general of finding the right tool for the problem. And he said that his video gaming 21-year-old son was talking about how great Discord was. And I was like, I've never heard of Discord. I'm not a gamer. I see some, so some of you guys are gamers. Some of you guys know Discord. So like half of our company's been like testing it out this week, just to see like, hey, should we be using a better tool? And is Discord really better? So interested to like hear your guys' thoughts. I think that those three things, culture, policy, and technology have been like pretty core to how we drive virtual engagement.
and it might not be a solution or an answer to this problem, but I really like when someone says, "Okay, then it's settled," and everybody's like, "What did I miss? Did I miss anything? Are we agreed to something? I need to know." And then you need to circle back and bring everybody in, and it kind of like increase the retention rate, and people are a little more engaged from there on. It's not a solution, it's not a tactic to get over this, but it works at times.
I agree with you, Russ, 100% on that. I think when I'm in front of someone, I can see sort of their just the physical language, and I was like, okay, I get it. They can see mine. And when I've started to do this a lot in the last 2 months, is to be audible with someone, like, and say directly, let me summarize what I heard. Let me make sure I understood. Let me just repeat that back to you. And in no means am I trying to, correct the person. I'm doing it for myself. And I think when I get sort of the validation, I'm like, yes, that's what you said, or no, you're totally off, Lil. Like, that's not what I said. Okay, let's repeat that again. So I definitely agree with you on that point. Sorry, Danielle, you're going to jump in on something there.
Me?
Yes.
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to add something where I thought you were going, Danielle, when you talked about like, did we really need to replicate all of these right into Zoom? I think it's also important that we are intentional with what is the meeting for, like what's the agenda? Do we need to have a meeting? And then how many people need to be there? Because I'll say in other like company meetings that I've been in, right, whenever it's more than like 5 people, then it turns into cameras off. People are going to zone out, not pay attention because it is a group call. So I think another way to like get more people engaged in video if it's a smaller group.
Yeah, Caitlin, I was actually going to say exactly that. I found that I work at Rosendin. For those of you who haven't met me, I manage IT applications for Rosendin. I work with Matt Lamb. And what I found is it's really about finding the right people for the meeting. So a lot of times you'll invite the person doing the work and their manager, just so it's like a CC on an email. Exactly. And all these CC people are going to turn off their cameras and check their phones the whole time. So they're like this. And this is an acceptable look now in a Zoom meeting. So I think it's about inviting the right people to the meeting. And then also in our culture, I found that the same person will turn on the camera for certain meetings and not for other meetings. So it's almost like, is it not important enough? And we have meetings where everybody's got their camera on, kind of like this. And there's other meetings where everyone's got their camera off. So there's something about the culture being set by the organizer, I believe. Not just the company, but the organizer having the expectation. So whenever we meet with Matt, my CIO, for example, the cameras are on. He likes cameras on. But there's other people that just don't. So I think it's a combination of technology tools, like Danielle mentioned, having the right people at the meeting, and then also being cognizant of the time of the meeting. Because one thing that's happened is now there's no lunch break, right? I've been in meetings continuously. And so when you need to use the restroom or grab a bite, you're like turning off your camera and it just gets awkward. So I think being cognizant of those things help with having video participation. In my opinion.
I think you're hinting at like 2 really interesting ideas. I don't think this is just like a construction industry problem. I think this is like a business problem. There are very few people who know how to host or participate in good meetings. How many meetings did you all attend today that like didn't have an agenda? Like at least probably all.
Only because I ran all of them.
Yeah, see, that's what we need, right? We need like more Broks in this world, right? So like they should all have an agenda. Like Dad, you mentioned like, why are you in this meeting, right? Are you just CC'd like how you'd be CC'd FYI in an email, or like, are you actually supposed to be part of this meeting? So like, why are you in the meeting? What are we trying to accomplish at the meeting? And making sure that that's like all set up front, and it goes beyond that too, right? Like how long should the meeting be? I do find that this weird things happening where like we're getting sometimes less done in the day because of this like death by meetings. Everything's set in like 30-minute or 1-hour chunks, when like maybe it used to be a 5-minute phone call and you like don't schedule a 5-minute meeting, but now everything's scheduled. It's just bad. So I think like one really interesting thing that you mentioned really has to go with like good meetings. I mean, maybe Brok, our meeting master, can share some of his tips and tricks, because like this is a problem I think with remote engagement.
Go ahead, Brok.
I think in general, what I have seen, because I've only been in the profession for about 20 years. So my perspective
Only 20.
is we tend to put people in a leadership role in the AEC industry based on what's available. It's not like in a software world where you become head of product because you have proven your product knowledge. So in a lot of cases, you're a project manager because no one else wanted to be a project manager. And now you're in charge of running the meetings, you're in charge of managing the team. And that skill set of project management, it's not what you went to school for in most AEC firms. It's kind of like taking the foreman and asking him to run the meeting. Well, he can run the safety meeting, he can run kind of who's going to be working on what piece, but having him coordinate now a VDC conference call is a nightmare, right? So that there's a skill set that you develop through our various professions of how to run a meeting. And I think what's missing is this kind of shadowing and kind of certification, if you will, of a role based on what you're actually doing for the company. And actually, if you don't have that skill set, go and get the training. I'm shocked how many businesses have people in a financial role that did not get an MBA or didn't study finance. And now they're in charge of making sure that the P&L report is actually up to speed. So from a meeting standpoint, I think from a cultural standpoint, running a meeting should be part of a business plan. Like I know Lilian and I and others probably didn't just become great orators of meetings. We saw examples of other people that we shadowed and learned from. And in a lot of cases, what I have experienced is really good leadership examples. I worked at HOK for a number of years, and there was one project manager that stands out as a great example. Her name was Amy Rowbottom. One of the things that Amy did is she always had an agenda for every single meeting, and she included that as an attachment to the meeting. And it was kind of understood, okay, I got to come with my P's and Q's, because what Amy did is she didn't just put together a bullet point of what the topics were going to be. She would say, okay, Danielle's going to be talking about this, and Lillian's going to be talking about this. She put people on notice that they were responsible for running the portion of that their purpose was. So to your point earlier, Caitlin, that there's kind of a role of what you're playing here. And if you knew that she was running the meeting, you knew to read the agenda, because you were not about to be sitting in that meeting and then finding out 0.5 on the bullet point that you had to give an update for something. I remember being in a meeting with Carl Galliato. If you've ever met Carl, he led the New York office, and ultimately he's actually in a pretty important role at HOK firm-wide now. I remember being in a meeting with him that someone did show up late, and he told them to turn around in front of everyone. And you only did that one time, or someone else did it as an example for you one time, and you knew, okay, I've got to meet with Carl, I'm going to be there early. The thing that we do bad culturally is we schedule hour-long meetings. And I think that's the fault of Outlook. It's the fault of agendas. Do you actually need a 60-minute meeting, or can it be a 47-minute meeting because you defined an agenda and that's as much time as you needed? I do a lot of training. 5 years ago, I was doing about 100,000 miles of travel doing training in person. So when I think about remote working, I also think people that do a lot of flying. I know, Danielle, you're on a plane a lot as well before this whole COVID
Not
thing.
right now,
but
I was.
So remote working, in my mind, is also just being flexible on knowing how to prepare for meetings. I mean, preparing agendas between meetings is one thing, but if all of your meetings are hour long, you never have that chance to prepare for the next meeting or let anyone else prepare for the next meeting. And I think what COVID has taught us is that we could almost handle hour-long meetings, because we're doing this thing where we're like, sorry guys, I got a hard stop. And then you can easily just kind of do this to the meeting and then jump into the next meeting. Whereas when we were in person, you had to have like 10 minutes because you needed to go back to your desk. You need to swap out that notebook. You need it to now go to the conference room and it's on the 3rd floor. Or you might need to get in a car and actually drive from the trailer back to the office. So you kind of had to book these like in between meeting slots. So what I do, because I do a lot of training, I actually set the training schedule as 50 minutes. And everyone kind of knows we're on time if we end early. And you don't understand the joy that people will give you when you give them 5 minutes of that 60-minute slot back. They're like, man, I really like Brok's meetings. That means I can actually go to my next meeting. And you get kind of the credibility, I think, of being a good meeting runner just because you shaved 5 minutes off. That's an easy thing that anybody can do. I think there was an update to Outlook actually during COVID that lets you change that setting. So I bet it was Microsoft's own office's team members that said, we need to make this change. This isn't working for us. So.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's like, I think a lot of like tactical things that you can do to run better meetings in this virtual environment. Like we use Gmail. I set my default to 15 minute. So I'm not getting creative enough to do like a 22-minute meeting, but like you might get a 15-minute or 45-minute calendar invite from me. And I hope people don't take it the wrong way that like I've given you 45 minutes, not an hour. Hopefully they're like Brok's clients and partners where they're like, oh, sweet, I get 15 minutes to myself. But I do think there's like a lot of just like tactical things that you can do. I try to stop talking during meetings with 5 or 10 minutes left to go through action items. And I don't take action items anymore unless they really should be for me. And that's, I think, something everybody should do, right? Is like, who owns that action item? It has to really make sense who owns it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just as important, like, sorry, Lilian, you talk about doing this agenda upfront planning, right? And giving everyone, hey, here's the objective of the meeting. Our goal is to come out of this with a decision on X, Y, Z question. But it's just as important at the end of a meeting to do a follow-up, hey, here's a quick email, quick summary of what we covered. And Danielle, like you talked about, here's action items, who's responsible, and when we expect an update. So I think that's just as important.
I actually just discovered a total business opportunity with what Brok said, because I don't think anyone's ever been trained on how to host a good meeting on the web, right? Like, how do you host a really good meeting? Because a lot of the meetings I go to, I find that the host never even asks for your opinion, but you've been there the whole meeting. You've been there the entire time. Nobody really wants you to weigh in. You're just hanging out. And so slowly you do the thing, right? With every meeting of mine, I make sure I go through everybody and say, does anyone have any comments? And I ask them, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Make sure there is a kind of buy-in. So I think it's a great opportunity, Brok, for you to do classes on how to host good meetings.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that I've learned from meetings is that I have sat in a lot of bad meetings too. So I think there's also a trend, I forget where I saw this, but there's a trend of presenting things poorly. That's also a way of training. Maybe it's a generational thing of memes are more popular. So if you show bad mistakes, people learn from those. But I almost think a better example of this is you've seen I'm sure you've seen the YouTube video where people are impersonating that guy who's joining the conference call. And there's like, you hit the unmute button, and it's almost like that's the training that we need. We almost need it to be culturally a joke. And then it's not funny, because if you're the person who can't unmute yourself, you don't have the excuse anymore, because that used to be funny to kind of be the guy who's like, I don't really know how you kids do it with these things nowadays, but you don't have the excuse anymore. I mean, everyone's got a smartphone. You could be over 70 and you know how to FaceTime now. So there's kind of a bar that has been raised. So why not raise the bar to the next level and actually set a habit of people to come into a meeting and you call out the person. So I didn't see you have an agenda for this. So is this just a 5-minute touch base because there was no agenda? Like, you could start to do something where it becomes kind of a cultural thing that you don't want to be responsible for. And just calling someone out by setting a good example is what I tend to do. I tend to tell people, and I do this to my own team. I tell them, I say, so what was this meeting for? Because I must not have gotten your agenda. I know you probably sent it and just didn't send it to me. And then that kind of sets the precedent, right, for future meetings.
We have someone that does that. He tentatives any meetings without agendas and sends a follow-up and is like, what is it that we're working on? And won't accept an invite until he has an agenda. And it's great.
Nice.
I think that's a really positive way, really, to help develop a good remote working culture, because it's not, nobody has to feel like they've made a mistake. Nobody feels like anybody's making a dig at them. And you're really using the tool like, hey, I'm not sure I can make that until I know what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of makes that little incentive. I know having a written artifact at the beginning and the ending, even for me, it helps just when I have that day that's all calls, because you get to 5 p.m. and it's, okay, what did I actually accomplish? What do I have to get done before tomorrow? It helps a lot to be able to look at that chain of, there's my agenda, there's the email we sent with the items after. Maybe this applies more on the startup resource side, but something that we'll bring up sometimes as the meeting starts to grow to more and more people is we think, how much is this going to cost us?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
What's the net cost to our company if 2 directors and an engineer and somebody from sales are all on one call for an hour? Like, what's that cost by the minute? And I think, obviously that picture could be different for a smaller company versus a very large one, but even at a large one, you could think, what's the cost to my project? What's not advancing because that architect is sitting here doodling away because we need them to weigh in on one thing near the end?
I know an accountant that in their firm, they have on the agenda what the meeting cost.
There you go. That's a
really
reason
cool.
to cut it short, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple months ago, maybe Todd, you might remember, we had someone who had a saying, no agenda, no attenda. I think it was Miles Anderson over at Procore. And same thing, if he didn't see an agenda, he would decline the meeting. He would not attend. And everyone knew if there was no agenda, he wasn't going to attend the meeting, and it became part of the culture. So,
and from a philosophical perspective, it kind of amazes me how we manage to have bad meetings in this industry. Because if you consider each meeting as a project, for that project to be successful, you need to have inputs, process, and output. And the input is obviously the agenda, the goals, or whatever. And there are different types of meetings, right? There are alignment meetings, the decision meetings, but still the process should be in place, and the output, whatever the documentation, the action items, those needs to be produced for that meeting to be successful. And to Adrian's point, there's a time associated with the small project. There's cost associated with it. There's documentation associated with it, and there's obviously some risks that you need to manage, because not having the right people is a risk, but having a lot of people is also another risk. So there needs to be a balanced stroke between those different aspects. And as an industry, we are driven by projects. I don't know why we cannot use that same approach to meetings, and it's kind of amazing.
There is one tip that I wanted to follow up with, and I'll pass the ball back to you, Danielle. But one of the things that we just started doing this week that I think aligns to what you're talking about, because we're remote, we're starting to do weekly kind of newsletters. So we've got a group that's responsible for our e-learning platform, our new education program. He's now doing a weekly update. This is what I'm doing this week. This is what I'm planning on doing next week. If you'd like to get engaged, this is how. And that inspired our marketing team to then do a marketing newsletter. Hey, this is what I'm doing this week. This is what I'm doing next week. And if you'd like to get engaged, this is how. And I'm going to start doing that as well, because I feel like that's a way of engaging across the aisle, across the actual virtual meeting space. It's a form that you kind of put together, but this is a whole new world of writing emails too. That's the other thing we do poorly. We could have a whole nother hour to talk about poorly written emails, but I wanted to play that because it made sense of what you were saying, Riss. Go ahead, Danielle.
No, actually, I might switch gears. Actually, not what I was gonna say, but kind of like an important piggyback on what you mentioned with this employee weekly newsletter. There's a lot of other forms of virtual team engagement, right? Beyond the meetings that I think we gravitated towards early in the conversation. And something that has been really important to our team at VIATechnik is how to still innovate in an entirely virtual world. And what's kind of interesting, right? We're a technology company, right? We've always had a lot of work practices that have enabled virtual work. And so I think a lot of our customers at least like assumed we'd be totally fine with this remote work. But I think that there's a lot of aspects of innovation and building an innovation culture that are really hard to replicate today. And I mean, one of the ideas that I've always gravitated towards is this thought that like, I might have half of a really good idea and Lilian has the other half. And it's only when we talk to each other, get that out in this like chance conversation that like something really great happens, right? Or we start with this little idea and it grows and people add to it, right? And then the team's created something great. That's really hard to do when everything's scheduled and everything has an agenda and everything's on Zoom or some other virtual platform. So we definitely haven't cracked the case on that. I think the jury's still out on like how we really, really embrace an innovation culture. But we have been trying like some things. We've given teams kind of like initiatives or missions to work on together. And a lot of really great things have come out of it. Like we have a really solid VIATechnik University platform that used to be on like this to-do list that just got pushed from year to year to year. But COVID finally like gave us a little bit of time. And I think like this driving force, like, hey, let's do this. Like, this is going to make us great. We need this now. So that's been really powerful. I'd love to hear other ideas of like how you still embrace an innovation culture, because I think that's important to a lot of the people in the round table here.
So at Applied, innovation culture is a really big deal for us as well. And we struggled with it at the beginning of COVID, but then we adopted a platform called Vima, which allows people to, everybody has access in the entire company, whether they're in accounting or technical or sales, HR, everybody has access to it and can go and say, here's a random idea and enter it in. And then people can comment on it and, vote for what they like or put a thumbs up. And what we've noticed through that is the collaboration that has happened has actually been better than beforehand, because people are talking with each other that never would have talked to each other beforehand, because they can see these different ideas, they can talk about them, they can, just intermingle. So that's been a really cool platform to, really take innovation to the next level and just bring ideas to the forefront that we didn't have beforehand.
What was it called again, Todd? Can you put a link in the chat?
Yeah.
Vima, VIIMA. Yeah, I'll try to find it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about those innovation platforms. Another really positive one, or one I've heard positive feedback on, is called Spigot. And yeah, I mean, these are tools that were like around pre-COVID, but I think have become like front and center in the innovation conversation now.
It's kind of a page taken from Agile, where you have your backlog of all the features that anybody can throw in. Sorry, somebody else was saying something.
I was going to say, Teams kind of worked for us because we have different channels for dedicated to different projects. And, everybody's involved with different projects and teams. And whenever you have scheduled something on your calendar, okay, I'm going to use this next 2 hours for this specific project, you can be available in the channel for that specific project. And if someone else is, dedicated the same time frame for the same project, you can like open up the camera, work on something, but also at the same time discuss stuff. So it's like almost replicating the office environment. You are working on the same thing. You don't need to look at the same thing. You don't need to do screen share or something, but working on something all the while brainstorming is also helpful, and supported with the planner, Microsoft Planner, also helps create and back to Adrian's comment, supports the culture of Agile, and you can create your backlog and actions and all the pieces in there. So you're working on something, you're brainstorming, and you're also following the structured roadmap all the same time. So it's kind of like a neat thing to have for us, at least for now.
I'm finding that culturally there's certain types of people that want meetings in order to do work, and there's certain people that just want a meeting to get an update. So just how you define the meeting's purpose to our discussion earlier, like this is a workshop. So we're going to spend 90 minutes brainstorming and using this technology. Maybe we're using Miro, or we're using some sort of collaboration tool. And then everyone's going to come into that meeting with the intention on contribution. But if you don't define those, what ends up happening is you think it's an update meeting, and then it ends up being just a whole discussion that could have happened, to your point, Rez, in a chat room for the last 2 weeks, and then it could just be a summary in the meeting. And I'm finding that we were just having too many meetings before COVID, and COVID's kind of forcing us, because there's only so many hours in the day, and then you end up with, I can't meet with you until next Thursday. Yeah, I got too much going on my calendar. Because what I've started to do, I learned this from my wife, I put things on my calendar that actually are what I need to do that day to prevent a meeting from being blocked. So creating meetings on your calendar to block meetings is not a bad strategy too. That's a free one.
And one thing that I learned from my wife is that she's a professor at the University of Alabama Business School here, and she's been thinking about this concept called flipped classroom, and she decided to switch over to that this semester because of the pandemic and her class is virtual. So she's recording her classes. The lecture is recorded and available for students before the class time. So they need to watch the video, and she also uploads lecture notes with blanks in them. So they need to watch the video and fill those blanks. So they need to learn themselves and come to the classroom with the preparation, the questions, the ideas. So the classroom becomes a discussion, a brainstorming session, which is much more interactive and much more useful for everybody. And I think that we can easily apply that to most of our projects, because I believe 80-90% of the information shared on the meetings can be shared easily beforehand, so that people have the knowledge, have the preparation, so that meeting can be focused more towards, again, based on the type of meeting, to decision, alignment, whatever that is needed. So again, this small project can be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up though, Rez. I definitely agree with you. And I think Danielle, I'm curious on your take, culture shift then too though, right? Of saying you need to be blocking time, like Brok said, to do preparation. If I'm going to be sending you, there's a ton of time, right? Well, I'll send something out like, hey, can you read over this document or this attachment before we meet? Because I want to get your ideas on it. And getting someone to actively do that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have like 100 seconds left.
Oh no. Okay.
We get the countdown though. That's
we got 100 seconds. What were you going to say?
Well, Lilian, is there, as our fearless leader, is there like something we were really supposed to get out?
No, I you know what? I'm juggling trying to take notes so I can do the recap, but I think this is by far has been the best remote session we've had. It's super great, engaging. I think you guys are all pros at attending virtual meetings and engaging. So I think the input from everyone has been super great. I think one of the last things, and we're probably going to get caught off in 73 seconds and counting, is, what are some of the ways we can measure that engagement? So I think I wanted to kind of close it off with that question in 64 seconds. Go ahead.
Tracking my time is part of my kind of business role. And if you don't have your own personal app of tracking time, one of the things I find on my phone, it tells me how much time I spent on Twitter, right? Because I have an iPhone and it kind of measures that. If you measure the time you're spending and as a measure, then you'll actually see how was my output and what was my results. Going back to Agile, it's the retrospective. If you give your own weekly retrospective, you'll actually perform better the following week, because you're actually judging your own use of your own time.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that metrics question is like really important. I wish we gave it more time. One thing I'll add to that conversation if I have time is, so one of our founding principles, we call it passion for results. And so we really try to be results oriented with what we measure, because it's not about like how many meetings you were in and how long you worked, right? And like how many hours you put into it, but it was like, hey, what's this end product? And let's come up with the metrics for measuring the success of that.
Sweet. A lot of people.
How many of these folks were mid-sentence when that happened?
I try and provide warnings every time, and every time people want to take it right down to the wire.